and committee that happened, but didn't know kind of what happened behind closed doors. So my first committee started out with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and then I moved onto the Institute of Management Accountants, onto their board, and then actually ended up being their president for 3 years and got some really good experience in that, learning how a board was ran and how to run a board too. And after that, I was asked to be the treasurer of the Fox Cities Marathon. I'm also the treasurer of the Girls on the Run board as well. So I get to utilize my finance background. For nonprofits, one thing that I'm also able to use on United Way is just to diversify my background a little bit. So typically my 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 job is finance related, but it also gives me the opportunity to look outside my normal day-to-day job and get on like marketing committees or governance committees. So stuff that I don't typically deal with on a day-to-day basis, but that way I'm just a better colleague here at Community First and be able to give them some insight and expertise than I normally do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's not a surprise that you're the treasurer of so many committees with that background you have. So appreciate that. Next, we're going to move it on to Sarah Schneider, who serves on the Family Radio Network Board, as well as Fox Valley Jail Ministries, and also on the leadership Fox Cities Alumni Association Committee. Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's exciting to be here. I serve as mobility manager with Valley Transit. My role is to help people overcome any barriers or boundaries to access transportation. And I specifically focus on serving populations like seniors who are now facing isolation or people with disabilities who otherwise wouldn't have the freedom and liberty to move about our great community. The reason I got involved in boards and committees initially, honestly, it was my job. I've done a lot of community-facing work throughout my career. I moved to the Appleton Fox Cities area back in 2002. And as a result of being in these roles that just expected me to be a representative of their organization to the community, I got involved, whether it be a service club like Rotary or Kiwanis or Optimist Club, the chamber, to get acclimated to the business community and how I can get interconnected and networked into the various business channels and learning the infrastructure of how business works. A plethora of reasons, but it really grew over time from being a duty to being a passion, and having the opportunity to learn about the causes and the impact and the ways in which I can make a tangible difference, whether it be in an organization or in the community or in the causes that those respective nonprofits or committees were targeting towards making the world a better place, and specifically the Fox Cities. So I'll go into that more, but thank you for having me, and it's truly a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's very cool how you got into it as a job and it became a passion. So I love that. Thank you for sharing. Next, we're going to move on to Scott Jensen, who serves on the Make-A-Wish Wisconsin board, as well as the Fox Cities Chamber's Pulse Committee. Scott.
Thanks, Andrew. I should correct Make-A-Wish. I'm not on their board because it's a really big statewide board, but I'm on their golf outing committee, some more committee work there, but then also volunteer with Pulse Fox Cities on the advisory council. I chair our professional development council and committee. And then in past life and other events, I served with Leadership Fox Cities Alumni Association, the steering committee. I'm a chamber ambassador. I do quite a bit. So I dumbed my list down a little bit on my profile there for this event, but my background, I worked in nonprofit and fundraising at the UW Oshkosh before one of the Boys and Girls Clubs. So I had a fundraising experience before, but now I joined the for-profit small business side with insurance. And I got involved just because, I think it's important for our community growth. Network I built, everybody on this panel, on this call, I've met because of my volunteer activities. And so it's just exciting to see who you can meet and you can grow as a person. You can build some really great, strong connections, and takes a lot deeper dive into the community. You can learn a lot more about our environment, our community here too. So excited to be here and excited for everybody to see attended this panel and still joined with the Zoom option. So thanks for hosting NTLI.
Thank you so much, Scott. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to move on to Connor Silp, who is on the Northeast Wisconsin PAC, as well as the United Way Fox Cities Emerging Leaders, along with Craig. So, Connor.
Hey everyone, Connor Stilp. I am a realtor with Century 21 Ace Realty and the owner of Fika Coffee and Tea downtown. The reason that I got started in board involvement a little over 5 years ago now is as someone who's grown up in the Valley, but then starting to sell homes and sell people in the community, I wanted to really kind of get that next level involvement and really see what it is about the Fox Cities that has people continuing to come back. And so what started as just kind of a curiosity and a networking perspective quickly grew into a lot of different avenues and opportunities where I just really fell in love with the activities and the involvement that that we were able to do in the community. And then it just kind of snowballed into more and more projects and more connections, and the relationships and the friendships that I've built throughout this have been super rewarding. And we've got a whole other hour of my whys to share with y'all, but that's kind of how I got started.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Connor. And last but definitely not least, we're going to move on to our fifth panelist, Melissa Jacobs, who currently serves on the Pillars board. Melissa.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you all. I came to the Valley, as it's my adopted home now, over 2 decades ago when I came to Wisconsin to work for Kimberly Clark. And I've learned so much there over the years. I'm now doing strategy consulting with my own firm. And, as I had the opportunity to get more involved with board membership a couple of years ago, for me, it was really, I had done a sort of self-assessment of, how I was feeling about the different avenues of my life. And I had really thought about the opportunity to leverage my time and the things that I had learned over the course of my career and how I could give back by applying them in a different way. And so I was excited to be able to, make more of a difference in the community. I had, like I said, really made this my home and was excited to help with the work that Pillars does, to help with serving and helping everyone have a home here in the Valley. So for me, it's really about, having that positive feeling of being able to use, the things that I've learned and give back. And it also gives me a really great opportunity to step out of my day-to-day and just get exposed to completely different challenges that others are facing on a day-to-day basis. And really is always a nice refresh and reset for myself, when I have those interactions with Pillars, stepping out of my day-to-day. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity to give back in a different way.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And thanks to all of our panelists for giving us a little bit of knowledge about who you are and why you got involved. And it's interesting, there's different reasons you all gave, to better yourself, to utilize the skill set you have, to give back to the community, networking. But I think all 5 of you mentioned learning. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. What have you learned from the members that you've served with on the boards that you're on or committees that you're on? And how has that helped you? So maybe I'll start with Connor.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest draw and the biggest takeaway for me has just been all of the different needs in the community and truly how much of an impact you as one single person can make when you're actually going set out to make a difference and to make a change. I had always been the person that wanted to be involved and wanted to be on boards, but it sounded super executive and it sounded like you have to have all of these accreditations and you have to be really successful and be far into your career. And that's just not the case. As long as you have a passion and you've got that fire to go out and make a difference, that was kind of the most eye-opening thing. As far as some of the biggest impacts that I've drawn from my peers and from people that I've been able to work with is just how to go out and actually be an ambassador for your community. I tell people all the time, it's almost like a different language that you speak when you're in your board mindset or when you're in your making a difference mindset, and being able to kind of talk that lingo with people and then also go out and learn how to live that out in your day-to-day has translated into me being able to bring people into the community, really be connected in a way that Not a lot of people have the opportunity to. And also you just get to meet a lot of amazing people. It's a great way to network and build friends that have a like-minded mindset of wanting to make the world a better place.
Wonderful, very cool. That kind of goes in hand with what Melissa was talking about, being able to step out of that day to day and have that different perspective, a different world in a sense. So I also want to maybe ask Scott to talk about this, because Scott, you mentioned you initially got involved to help yourself grow. So what have you learned and how have you grown?
I think, the biggest thing is that things don't just happen overnight. Like, as much as you think, hey, I'm going to join this board or this club or this group or anything, it's like, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to be like a trailblazer, I'm going to just change everything. And you got to build consensus and understanding. And so you can't just come in there like a barnstorm and try to bulldoze people over or anything like that. It's like, you got to gain the trust of everybody, that process of building a relationship and understanding and building consensus so everybody agrees this is the best thing for the group, for the goal of the mission of the organization. So that was always huge to me to see that. You think, man, writing's right here on the wall, but you got to help everybody lead them to water and have them drink the water. And sometimes it's not always as simple. So I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned. And I think in my area, my expertise, a lot of it's been fundraising in the past. And there's so many more elements to what helps a nonprofit be successful. And that's not just fundraising. Yes, we need dollars to help further the cause and hire staff and those resources too. But, there's volunteers that are needed, there's staff, there's program, there's the whole thing, a bunch of things to implement to be successful. And so I've been able to do that in a variety of roles in the past. It's just a lot of fun and exciting. And it's fun to, sometimes one of those things that keep you up at night and you're like, man, this has nothing to do with my income or my day-to-day job. I just purely I want to be able to figure this out and solve this problem. And, being able to bridge connections with different organizations and connect those dots for people is so much fun to see that when you can be like, I don't know how this is ever going to relate and this person's going to be useful to me. But then a year later, I'm like, oh, this is why. And then you're able to introduce to somebody. It's a lot of fun.
Wonderful, very cool. And it's interesting how you kind of learn about that big picture from a leadership level, being on a board, right? And learning, like you said, it's much more than just fundraising and all the other elements that come into making the organization successful. So very cool to hear about that. So there was a great question that came in from an audience member that actually is on my list as well. So I'm going to jump to that one. And that is, how did you decide where to serve? How did you pick which nonprofit you wanted to serve on or connect with them? And then I'm going to add to that, how did you first connect with them? How did you end up getting involved with them? Did you approach them or did you wait, or what did that look like? And so maybe I'm going to go to Sarah. Why don't I have you start with that?
Absolutely. And it's a multifaceted question. Quite frankly, what was the driver for me initially, and I got to preface what I'm going to say with that, is how did it align with my career? So when I was first getting introduced to the community, I was seeking ways to get connected to basically my demographic, which at that time was the business community. And so to me, there was no better alignment than the Chamber of Commerce's, where there was business members and the ability to network and the ability to get involved in the various committees of the chambers to be able to learn different aspects like legislation, government affairs, small business support, and all those various things. And so it was mutually beneficial because it would give me knowledge and experience to grow myself professionally, but it also reciprocated by developing me as a more business-minded individual and learning greater depth in the functionality of businesses. As that evolved from a business professional alignment, it evolved into more of a personal alignment. For example, my dad had a heart attack when he was 38 years old. And as I was approaching my mid-30s, I really became aware of how young 38 is, because I was really young when my dad had a heart attack at 38. And so I thought, how can I get the message out that heart attacks are preventative? Heart attacks, you can make a difference, a lifestyle change to be preventative. So I joined the Go Red for Women committee and eventually became the chair. And on my 38th birthday, I was the chair for Go Red for Women, and had a very personal, impactful, I believe, message as the keynote, as the messenger, as the MC of that particular program and that particular fundraiser that year, to say, this is why this cause personally impacts me and why I'm here to make a statement or make a petition to all of you for why not only do we need to adopt healthy lifestyles, but you can invest in the preventative natures of this. So there's just so many interconnected components to that. But I really want to actually kind of tip off what Connor was saying before, just in respect to his answer to going into a committee or a board and having that intimidation factor, because that I went in with curiosity. Like, how else would I be able to sit around the table with the CEOs or presidents of companies and be in their personal space for an hour and learn? And I may not have spoken or said a word in so many of those instances because I didn't feel I had anything to contribute. But did I learn? I took in so much, and I was able to glean from their diplomatic way in which they would lead the meeting or offer their insights, or even debate a heated topic and learn how to respect other people's viewpoints that were different than your own, but yet build alignment so that collectively this group can move towards a common goal and get results and get the job done. So I could go on. I'll pause.
Thanks for sharing that. That's wonderful. I love that perspective. So I'm maybe going to ask Melissa to share a little bit too about how did you pick which nonprofit you wanted to serve on, and then how did you go about being on the Pillars board? What did that look like in the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. My story might be a little bit different, but I think still relatable in the thought process. I actually had done a little bit of sort of self-assessment and had identified the opportunity to give more of my time. And then about 2 months later, as serendipity would have it, a good friend who also served on the Pillars board reached out to me to ask if I would be interested. And so while I hadn't taken the step to actually go and search something out, I had the opportunity come to me to assess whether it was going to be a right fit for me and whether that was the right time. And so my thought process and my decision process sort of came through a couple different angles. One was, what were they looking for? What would sort of my role be? And in that case, and the reason that my friend reached out to me was they were looking for some marketing expertise to join the board. And so that aligned well with, my desire to give more of my talent and things that I had learned back to a local organization. So that was a good fit. The second one was, did I have a connection to the mission? What I learned in the process of learning more about the Pillars organization, I had been familiar with the shelter or crisis housing portion of Pillars mission through, just being involved in the community. And that tends to be the piece that we're all most familiar with. But in the process of evaluating and getting to know the executive director and some other folks on the board, I learned about how Pillars actually is sort of end-to-end service and helping people, get back on their feet and deal with the different situations that they have. For example, supportive housing for folks who, don't have the means or maybe the credit record to be able to get, a full rent, helping support, those who are, working their way back to being able to get affordable housing in the community. And what I recognized was that I actually have a far more personal connection to that than I realized within my family. And while we hadn't experienced in our family the shelter side of homelessness, we did experience, and we do experience a family member who needs support, has some mental health challenges, needs support, and is, kind of like the exact client that Pillars serves in different parts of the organization. So that was a fit as well. And it was really the combination of those things, as well as the people that I would be interacting with, that brought it all together for me and made it the right fit for me to join.
Wonderful. Very cool story. Thanks for sharing that. You mentioned the connection to the mission, right? And I think that's important for anyone when you're serving on a certain board or committee, that you have some connection to that mission. And there was a great question that came in from the audience again about, talk about the influence or an example of an influence you've had, an impact, I would say, by being on a board or a committee, and how have you helped impact the organization or influence the organization in some way. So kind of a proof that by serving on a board or a committee, you can have some influence and you can make certain things happen. So talk about that a little bit. And I'm going to start with Craig.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, I have a real life story that's kind of in the works right now, with just connecting people that I have connections with, that the nonprofit Girls on the Run didn't have a connection with, until I kind of made some connections. So we're in the process of creating our stuff for our fundraiser coming up in February. And we decided that a video story line would be a great way to tell that story. And in the event that if we weren't able to have this in person, we could possibly use this as a plan B. But I was just awarded a Future 15, and with that process, I was connected with an individual who did our recording and was connected him with Girls on the Run to do the recording of that video for the nonprofit. And then another connection that just happens to be with the Women's Fund. So I ended up connecting with their executive director. And thought that she might be a good MC for our fundraiser, being that the Women's Fund supports Girls on the Run. So kind of a real life, just my influence on the organization, that I don't know what would happen if I wasn't in the position. But it's neat to see kind of a story or an idea being thrown out and everyone going, hey, that's a great idea, and let's run with it. There's other ideas that didn't happen that way, but it still, I think, sparks other ideas from the board. I love what you said, Sarah, just learning from other executives that are also possibly at the table, that I didn't think early on I should have been sitting at that table, but because I rose my hand and said, I'll serve. So I learned a lot from that I probably should have been giving my 2 cents, but didn't feel like I had enough buy-in yet or confidence to say my 2 cents. But the board service did bring that confidence level out that I needed. So that's something that I've been able to contribute.
That's wonderful. That's a great story. And it does feel good, right? Knowing that you can have that influence and that impact. So very cool story. And thank you for sharing that. I'm going to open it up to any of the other 4 panelists want to speak to that and having an influence or impact.
I just had a recent. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
I'm going to have Scott and then Sarah quickly go. Scott first.
I previously served on the board of directors for the Fox West Chamber of Commerce, and it was probably 3 years ago now already, but we had our executive director leaving, and at the time, the size of the organization, like 200 members, so we had to go hire a new executive director. So being a board of directors, we had to then keep things ongoing and take the reins of some things going forward. We're like a very functional board with only a part-time director, but getting to hire somebody. So when you're thinking of board leadership, depending on how each organization set up, some have executive committees and whatnot too, but getting to hire, the leader who's going to help, offer some direction to the organization, also have to report to the board, but getting to have the experience of actually hiring somebody at that level to lead your overall organization for the future, and trust them that they're going to carry out the mission and organizational goals that are going to help our community. That's pretty cool. And having an opportunity is definitely a growth opportunity, working through an interview process as somebody, have the right questions to ask. How do you compensate them? Because at that time, I'd never been in a leadership role where we were hiring and firing people. And in this position, we were having to replace somebody who had took a new role on, and we had to go and think about all these different factors that are going to affect the organization. What can we afford? What are their hours? What are expectations? So that was something I learned. That was quite a big impact for an organization of that size.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Sarah?
Yes, I want to be mindful of the fact that on this call, we have both nonprofits represented as well as perhaps aspiring future board members for the nonprofits featured here. And I do my best work thinking out loud. And I see nonprofit boards and committees as being a big think tank. Like, how can we take the best of our minds and put it together to drive forward the best for the organization as a whole? And like I believe, I'm going to be general, every nonprofit that looks toward the year end and bridging their gap for their budget, if they're, falling short on fundraising goals or whatever their goals are. And it was about early October that Fox Valley Jail Ministries, we had to sit down at our board table and say, what are we going to do to meet our year end goal? How are we going to balance our budget and achieve what we need? And I just kind of like flippantly said, maybe we should reach out to the major donors we know we can count on every year that are going to come through for us at the end and see if they'd allow us to go out for a gift match. And so our board president did that, went out to our major donors and said, would you be willing to front your best gift rather than coming in at the end to help us bridge our gap? We'd love to challenge our donor base to do a match. We got $20,000 presented or pledged to say, yes, we'll give you $20,000, go match it. This is the largest gift, even in a normal year end, that we would have ever received. So already there, we were just overwhelmed by that. And then we were fearful, are we even going to meet this goal? Because, wow, we've never asked our donors to step up and do a $20,000 match. And they, not only did they do that, but we had one individual donor come out and say, I will match it. So we tripled our end of year financing goal just in the matter of doing something that we've never done before. And we're willing to take a chance and try. And our last board meeting, we're sitting around going, what are we going to do with this money? Because that we went so much above and beyond, and the needs are so vast that now we have to put a plan together on how we can prioritize this. And we just feel so grateful. And of course, I'm just in shock because I really didn't put it out there with any degree of confidence that we could do it. And boy, I proved myself wrong.
Well, great work. And I don't think in all my years of board service, I've ever had to wrestle with the question of what do we do with all this money? So fabulous job. That's amazing. Maybe you should come work for us at United Way. So, want to move on here. It's starting to allude to it, but I kind of want to bring it out a little bit more. The difference between just being a volunteer for an organization and being a volunteer board member at a nonprofit organization and what that looks like. So I'm going to ask maybe Connor to start and talk a little bit about what that difference looks like.
Absolutely. So, I mean, my favorite term for board service is, are you wanting to be more planning or more boots on the ground, right? So kind of the executing those actions. So of course, being a volunteer, you're involved in your volunteering your time, volunteering your money, volunteering a resource or a gift, any sort of thing that you are doing to lightly make a difference or be involved, or, you could be devoting 40 hours a week to it. When you are on a board, that's more going to be with some obligations, with some commitments, usually a 1, 2, or 3 year time commitment. And then oftentimes that gives you the power to vote on things. So when you're involved on a board membership level in terms of volunteering, you can still carry a lot of that boots on the ground action, but at least in the boards that I've served on, a lot of those things then kind of get escalated up into how are we steering things? Are we chairing committees? And how are you going out and really taking your ideas and getting them out to the people that can really help to execute all of that? Same thing as everyone else was saying with direct involvement. My favorite phrase is your resume does not dictate your ability to change the world. And so just going forward on everything that you do, realizing that, it does take planning, it does take time to execute things, but even on a volunteer level, if you aren't ready to take that commitment into being a board service member, you can still make the same amount of impact. And truth be told, sometimes the people that are actually the ones that get to go out and execute the ideas that we as the board get to put together, they're the ones that really get to see it come to fruition right in front of them. So both, I just want to emphasize, are incredibly valuable. They're super important. And just because you don't have the time or the availability to commit to a board term commitment, you can still make the same exact difference that we all make sitting and sharing things.
Absolutely. Great point. And sometimes there's opportunities to serve on committees of the board before you actually move up to that full board level to get involved that way. I'm going to ask Melissa maybe to speak to this a little bit as well. The difference between being, especially in regards to Pillars, is a great example. The difference between being a volunteer at Pillars and being a volunteer board member at Pillars.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Connor said, right? So we leverage volunteers, much like I think all nonprofits, to really help the engine go, right? At Pillars, the volunteers are a critical part of the work that we do to serve the community. And it is a lot of the boots on the ground, the serving of meals, right? And so it's just a very different experience, sort of from a volunteer perspective, whether it's serving meals, whether it's helping get mailings out, right? Whether it's helping to serve on a committee that is planning an annual event or annual gala, right? So doing a lot of the legwork, serving as a volunteer during an event, it just tends to be, a little bit more of kind of using your energy rather than when it comes to the board, it's time, but it's also more, a little bit more of bringing some of those business skills, bringing some more of those connections in. And so it's just a different type of work, all of it critical to, helping the organization run. It's just a different type of work. And so the way that you want to spend your time and the way that you want to give back would probably dictate which side of that or both you'd like to participate in.
Great, excellent. And Melissa, I'm going to stick with you for the next question I have to have you answer this first, but part of the difference between just being a volunteer at an organization and being a volunteer board member, especially at a nonprofit, is the expectations, as we've been talking about, especially around the expectation of potentially giving. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. My personal experience is that I've made a commitment as part of my commitment to being a board member to make an annual gift of a financial nature. However, the amount of that gift is completely up to me. So we do have a commitment, but that is fully within, what I feel called and compelled to give on any given year's basis.
Okay, so Pillars has the expectation as board members that you give, but the amount is up to you. But that way, board members are expected not only with all the time and energy and effort, but also to give something financially.
Yep, that's been my experience with Pillars. Yep.
Wonderful. Sarah, can you speak to that a little bit as well?
I was hoping you'd ask. So again, there's been different seasons in my career when I couldn't financially provide. My kids were young. I was raising a family. I was just getting started in my career. And so I used the time, talent, treasure assessment, which is, am I able to give my time, which is the best gift I can offer at this very juncture? Can I give my talent? Is there something about my marketing, sales, organizational development, or connectivity that I can offer this organization for their betterment? And then now, as my career has become more established and I've become much more of a budgeter and planner and proactive giver, now I've been able to give my time or been able to give financial resources. I've also led capital campaigns on numerous boards and for organizations to be able to, make the determination as to whether or not we would expect our board members and even the staff of the organization to be contributors financially. And we've always needed to or felt the need to ask for participation because it's easier to go out to those you're asking for money to say, we have the entire board and the entire organization behind this goal with everybody giving financial gifts. But we have never imposed an expectation of what that gift should be. We've allowed people to determine their level of giving. Even if it's $1, at least we can say 100% of our board or our staff is behind this fundraising goal. So, but I personally believe the time, talent, treasure is a way of assessing what can I give and what position am I in to be able to bring an offering to this organization.
Great concept of that, and that's something to consider when you're considering joining a nonprofit board, is understanding there's probably that expectation, but what are you able to do? And that's a great way to go about assessing that. So very cool. Thank you for sharing. going to shift gears a little bit now. We've been kind of focusing on the positive side of things. What have you learned? How has it helped you grow? The impact you've been able to have with the nonprofits. But as we know, things aren't always just rosy red, all the time. So I want to talk about maybe some of the challenges that some of you have experienced in serving on a board or committee, and how is that to turn it into a positive, which I always like to do. How has that helped you grow? But first, talk about the challenges that you've experienced. So I'm going to start with Craig.
Andrew, let me just jump in here. There's a question about time that people spend on boards. And so I think that might be part of this discussion too, is when people are looking at being on boards, the challenges. And part of that is, what does the board expect of you in terms of time commitment? And what do you feel that you can put in? How do you think about that?
Great. Yep, absolutely. I didn't see that come in, so I appreciate that. And who can speak to that, the time commitment expectation? Scott, would you like to talk to that a little bit?
Take that one for you. So that was a great question. So I and Paul, I'm on the advisory council, so we have that hour meeting, and I chair another committee that's responsible for a number of programs throughout the year. And so, it's an hour usually advisory council meeting. It's an hour monthly meeting, or sometimes semi every other month, bi-monthly meeting, just to look at planning events and things like that in the next event. So it's usually 2 hours there plus whatever work between the next meeting to get prepared. So I would guess 3 to 4 hours in my case has been usually about reasonable for that type of level of involvement. If you're going to be on a board member and then chair a committee, because you're reaching out to your constituents that are helping you fulfill your objective, making sure they're keeping up on their tasks. But obviously, if you're chairing a committee, you want to delegate some of that work and responsibility out, so you're more steering as opposed to having to do all the work. About 3 to 4 hours has been my kind of typical monthly involvement with just that one organization.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Craig, can you share your perspective on the time commitment and other expectations, if you can think of any?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the board, and Scott kind of alluded to if it's the chair or the board, or not chair, committee or the board. Obviously, the time requirement is different. And I think depending on how big the board is, my time has different aspects as well. So like the Institute of Management and Accounts, it's a pretty small board, and it's just a membership-based board. So that one wasn't huge time commitment. There definitely was time that I put toward it, but in comparison to like the Girls in the Run being their treasurer, it's more of an active board where it's a very small staff. They have a staff of 1 executive director and 2 part-time. So the board is also doing some of the, or I should say, board as a volunteer is doing some of the work versus having paid staff do some of the work. So, and the marathon, Black Cities Marathon, I get to do that as part of kind of my day-to-day work too, just at Community First. So I don't necessarily have to put time aside for that. United Way, that really depends on the month sometimes, and how I raise my hand of what I can help with that month. Some months it's more time consuming, sometimes it's just say an hour and a half a month. But I also find myself, as I just do other things in the community, I'm kind of taking mental notes or taking things of how can I bring that idea back, or bring this item back to the committee and say, can we implement this, or can we make this better? Like, I'm a runner, so when I go to other races, I'm always kind of just seeing how their registration goes in comparison to ours. So there's always just different things that you can be aware of as you're in different boards. You can just have those feelers out all the time. Do you want me to jump into the next question then, Andrew?
Yeah, I was going to tee it up again, but I just wanted to make sure nobody else wanted to speak to that. But it's funny that you brought that up, because yes, there is obviously a time commitment, but as you mentioned, we're always, when you serve on a board, especially if you have a passion, you're always thinking about things all the time, almost 24/7, not to scare anyone away. It comes naturally, right? So that's a very interesting point. Sarah, I saw you unmuted. So do you want to say just a few things, and then we can move on to the next question?
I do. time is a really important question in determining whether or not you are able to participate to serve the organization and their needs. Because I've served on boards where we meet monthly for an hour, quarterly for 3 hours, or on an executive committee, to Craig's point, you just have an additional commitment because you're being called to a greater level of connectivity. But there are different kinds of boards as well. There's advisory boards, there's working boards, there's managing boards, there's oversight boards. And depending on which type of bylaws those organizations are written in can also determine the level of expectation for the time commitment that they're going to desire from you. And just recently, the last 6 months, I've actually had a part-time job serving as interim CEO for one of my boards, because we lost our CEO, and in the transition of the search, I had to step in and be very involved in day-to-day operations. And that normally was not our role. I obviously was able to commit that time and participate in that level, but there are also twists and turns that on the onset, it looks like a simple commitment of an hour a month, but it can turn into quite a commitment in order to keep the organization on its feet.
And then I forget to unmute sometimes. Absolutely, it can be. So thank you for sharing that. I am going to pivot now to the question I did want to ask earlier before we got into the time discussion, which I'm glad we did, is about, can some of you speak to the challenges that you face when serving on a board or committee, and then morph that into the positive? What did you get out of that? But what did you learn from going through that challenge? So Craig, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think COVID was a huge challenge for a lot of nonprofits. I think each one that I was involved with, we had to pivot to virtual in all of them, or cancel. So the Fox Days Marathon, we actually had to cancel the event because it just wasn't safe to put on. In 2020, we were able to do a race in 2021 safely and successfully. Our Institute of Management and Accountants, that went all virtual. Girls on the Run, we went virtual. And then this past year, we had our biggest year ever. So that was hard to go virtual in each circumstance, but we knew it was the right healthy decision, because obviously that typically affects registration. People don't like virtual. They like the people aspect of meeting and that connection, relationship building. But virtually, you don't get that. With the fundraising, as I went through a board academy with Nonprofit Leadership Initiative last year, starting today actually, and one of the fundraising pieces that I learned in that was that it takes 7 times, so not to give up. And I think fundraising is always a challenge to all nonprofits. And like Sarah said, sometimes it's just throwing out those off the wall ideas that then get ground and traction even more than you ever anticipate. Now you have other issues, and that's not an issue, that's a good issue of what do you do with all this money? And that would be kind of the best case scenario of all the fundraising. For our budgeting process, that was, in the Girls on the Run, we budgeted very conservatively in the event that fundraising didn't come through as we had hoped. So we slimmed down everything as much as we could, and then we didn't give up on any of the fundraising efforts. This is what kind of bare minimum have to get to, and then we'd reach out and assume full pedal to the metal. And luckily that is what happened, and we were able to impact a lot more girls than we ever anticipated this last year. So that was great, but trying at the time.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of challenges, but it sounds like you guys came through with in every single example, and you have a lot of learnings that you're able to take to that you can apply elsewhere, which is very cool. Melissa, can you speak a little bit to some of the challenges you might have experienced and what you've learned?
Yeah, Pillars is the first board that I served on and had this much exposure to. So for me, when I first joined, it was sort of a lot of learning of what's my role and how does the board interact? What is the role of the board? As well as, just trying to figure out what were the ways that I could uniquely most make a difference. So I think I was on the board for, let's call it about 6 months before COVID hit. So I think that again was a bit of a challenge because that onboarding and more one-on-one conversations that I might have been able to have with folks kind of went away because we also went to virtual. And so there was a little bit less of that kind of chatting before or after a board meeting. So for me, it was really just learning how to build those connections, get connected into the organization, and just some, good learning for me on overall kind of networking and learning about a new organization.
Great, thank you. And I apologize, my dogs are deciding to play in the background right now. So, wonderful. I want to shift gears yet again now to talk about, yes, there's always challenges we experience, but a lot of the organizations that you serve on, that I've served on, have supported us and can support board members through those challenges. And so talk a little about how the nonprofits you've worked with and have served on have supported you in your role. Connor, let's start with you.
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic for someone who's self-employed. I don't have a company. I don't have anyone to really drive dollars from. It's me, myself, and I. And so I think overall, the biggest thing that I've drawn from in terms of supporting my career has just been the connections. And it's been being able to know people in every corner, know all these small businesses, and just relate it back to falling in love with the community that I ultimately am selling. And now as a small business owner in our community, just being able to take that and then also take the super tight-knit entrepreneur mindset and community that we have, especially in downtown Appleton, and share that with my team. That's been really impactful, and it's been really exciting to watch a lot of these young, most of my staff are near graduating college or in the middle of their kind of building career paths, and watching them take some of the lessons and things that I've been able to teach them from a small business standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, and have them spin that into their own life has been really, really cool to see. So my answer is never going to be, I've not sold a house because I'm on a board. There's nothing that I've gone and volunteered on that I've gone, wow, this has helped me with business development. And ultimately that was a really cool lesson to learn. I went in thinking this will be great for networking and all that. And then that really allowed me to focus on falling in love with the areas that I'm serving in, and kind of really hone my skills on what does it mean to switch out of that business mind and get into let's better the community and let's see what ideas we can bring into play.
Wonderful. Very cool. Thanks for sharing. Scott, do you have anything you want to speak to on this?
Yeah, I think, and one of the questions that was part B of this, right, I think was like, also as a volunteer, how does the organization support us as volunteers and making our role easier to support the mission? So a lot of that marketing material will be provided to you. Mailers go out to constituents, which then we follow up and say, hey, Andrew, did you receive this letter? Or, if you're on my list of people to call and follow up with. So my Make-A-Wish experience, the staff pretty much, we meet monthly. They provide the agenda, they provide resources, they bring us lunch for the day. And then we meet, huddle, talk about what we need to do, who's gonna work on what. We kind of have a checklist, and then they provide us with letters to bring to donors. They bring us marketing materials. They send us, scripted email blasts, scripted phone calls to make. So if you're really new and not comfortable making these outreach calls, be it for dollars or for volunteers, and you're going to be the volunteer coordinator calling people to volunteer, the organization typically is going to help and supply you some information so you feel comfortable and that you're going to be successful in that role. So that part is usually helpful. And in my career, I think it's just a lot of just that, you get so well connected that this morning I was at a networking event, and the person who's chairing this new committee is like, if you need to know people, know Scott, because he knows everybody. And so it's nice to be able to have that in my community, to be able to say, hey, through my servant, like leadership and things like that, I've been able to meet a lot of people, learn a lot about our community. I moved here 10 years ago. But to be able to be somebody who's moved here and worked in other communities before, to be able to have the network and be able to help introduce people to one another is very exciting. And that's what I think the best thing that our nonprofits help with me is just connections and introductions, and it's been able to relate and translate into my day-to-day work.
Wonderful. Very cool. And you do happen to know everyone in this community. You're so well connected, Scott.
Thanks.
Hey, Andrew, let me jump in here again. There's another
go ahead, Jeff.
semi-related question in the chat, which has to do with someone who's looking at joining a board and is wondering about their responsibility or liability for past actions that the board has taken before they were there. I'm curious from this group how they look at the issue of liability and how they think about things like their organization having directors and officers insurance, because there's some things you're in a legal position when you step onto a board. Would people be willing to speak to how they think about that?
So I want to make sure I understand. You're wondering about making sure they're covered in terms of being liable for anything that would happen while being a board member?
Well, that's the micro question. The bigger question is, how do you think about the fact that you have a legal responsibility, and how do you and the organization make sure that board members are protected for the actions that they take when they're on a board?
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying. Craig, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Sure, I can speak to it. For my knowledge of a couple of the boards that I'm on. So part of being a board member is you have fiscal responsibility and I guess governance kind of over the organization. So if something is being unethical or maybe it's challenging what you think is right, I think you have to kind of raise that red flag and say, hey, this doesn't seem like it's good or right, or I think we need to talk about this either now or maybe a side group needs to come together with the executive director or just a couple other individuals if most of the people are in agreement of it and you're kind of in the minority. I luckily have not had to ever deal with that. So I'm just kind of hypothetically speaking how that might go in my mind if I were to be put in that position. On a couple of the boards that I'm on, they actually have the board and director insurance as part of the overall insurance policy. So that helps cover us as a board for if something were to happen that we didn't know was happening, that we would be liable for. But like I said, if I was made aware, I would be raising my hand to say, hey, this is not right.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, there are some liability concerns or things you should all be looking into before joining a board just to ensure that you're protecting yourself. So I do want to pivot. We are running close to our end of time, but I have a bunch of other questions I want to get to. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them, and I know I don't see a bunch of people dropping off, so I am going to just ask one more question before I hand it back to you, Annette, if that's okay. And just ask all of our panelists to say, you have the floor now. What advice would you give to somebody that's looking to get into a board? What can you tell them? Any last minute advice that you want to give out? So I'll start with Connor.
I think ultimately the biggest thing that I always preach to anyone who's asking questions about board involvement is go in openly and honestly, and don't treat it like a job interview. Don't feel like you have this huge obligation, and most importantly, show up with your time and a willingness to learn. That's what anyone is looking for when it comes to involvement, service. And no idea is a bad idea. I tell all of my first-time homebuyer clients, there's no such thing as a stupid question because I've asked all of them. Everyone in the room and everyone that you're speaking to has asked those questions that you're wondering and curious about. So just go forward with an honest foot and the best intentions. And if something isn't right or something feels off while you're in that kind of interim, if you want to speak about it and bring those things up, because we are all just human beings who are here trying to do our best to better what we are passionate about. Everything else is just fancy letters behind your name.
Great advice. Wonderful, Connor. Thank you. Scott.
Just look at something you're passionate about. You're going to be spending some time every month on that topic. So make sure it's something that's going to align with what you want to do. If you have a skill set and you want to be pigeonholed into, this is my skill set, so I'm going to keep doing that. So i.e. like Craig's in the finance role and he wants to continue to serve as a treasurer and a finance role on the board, cool. But if you really do want to be not pigeonholed and say, I want to be able to do something else that's not my day-to-day, just make sure you speak that right away. So that way the organization knows, hey, if we're recruiting Craig to be on here and Craig has no interest in being the treasurer, well, make sure you voice that, because if you're joining the board and say, I really want to do the marketing, because I never get to do marketing, like make sure that you know that. So if the person's recruiting you for that role, that it aligns so that you're able to help fill that gap, because a lot of boards are recruiting people to fill a void, whether it's legal advice, financial background, fundraising, volunteer coordinating. Usually boards have a chemical makeup that's going to suffice and fill in those gaps. And so making sure, if you don't want to be pigeonholed because that's what you do for a day-to-day and you want to do something different in the evening, just make sure you communicate that and make sure it's a organization you're going to be passionate about and learn to love.
Excellent advice. Very good point. Thanks for bringing that up. Craig, any last minute advice?
Yeah, I think I'll do, since I didn't get to really talk about the Board Academy that Leadership Nonprofit does, I will plug that a little bit, but also I would just say do it. Like, jump in. If you have any desire, and kind of what Scott said, you have to have a mission that matches a passion that you have. So it's not really, like, I don't see it as volunteering. Like, I really enjoy the organizations that I volunteer and serve on. And the networking that I get to do, the United Way, I come away from that each Friday morning. It is so energized and like I'm ready for that day. It's just crazy because it's a bunch of 20 to 40-year-old people that are just very outgoing and have a passion for our community. It's not intimidating as it may seem. I was thought that it was intimidating until you're actually in the seat and everyone's in the same seat as you are. It's no one's better than you. You're just as good as them, or you're not as good as them. You're all in the same position. And one other thing is to ask questions. Do an interview with either the executive director if you have a passion to serve on their board, or with a board member. A lot of those members will definitely sit down and have a cup of coffee or have lunch with you to talk about position. If there isn't one open, I'm sure they'll let you know. And typically positions do open up periodically depending on the board. So you can get it to see, maybe join a committee, and then you can experience it that way to see if it really is a passion that you have. And I'll end on the Board Academy. So if you have any inkling that you want to serve and have some time to go through this program, it was a 6-week program. I learned a ton. It was about 10 years of board experience, but it was very informal board experience that I didn't know if it was being ran correctly or ran good. Going through that program, I got pointers and tips of how to properly run a meeting, or to say, hey, this is run just how it should be. And to feel confident to say that, to speak up if something isn't being ran correctly, or fundraising, different tips and tricks of how to fundraise better. That doesn't, if they get turned down the first time, you can ask 6 other times, because it typically takes 7 times. To board governance, the ethical legal side of the board. So they dive into everything, and it's a cohort of like 20 people, all different range in skill sets. So it's a great experience for me. So sorry for that being long.
No need to be sorry for that. Wonderful shameless plug of NPLI's Board Academy and United Way's Emerging Leaders. So thank you for both of those. I appreciate that. Melissa, and then Sarah, of course, but we'll start with Melissa. Last minute advice.
Much like Scott said, I think for me, it really comes down to knowing and kind of reflecting on what you're looking for. Why are you called? Why are you being called to want to serve and to want to give back? And kind of knowing that piece, along with, as everyone else has said, what is it that you're passionate about? And where do you find the intersection between those two things? That's my advice.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And last but not least, Sarah.
to take a multifaceted approach, and I really think everybody said the same thing, but I'll reiterate it as succinctly as I can, and it's mission, mission, mission. The organization has to have a strong mission, a commitment to that mission, because as a board member and a representative, not only are you coming forward because your personal values and passions align with that mission, but the decisions you're making around that boardroom table are specifically focused on advancing that mission. And so I guess I'm just going to leave it there, because I think a strong mission is the driver of all things. And I think that is the impetus to why you would get involved and the impact you can make and all you'll gain from benefiting from that partnership. So thank you, Andrew, and everybody, Annette and team.
Yeah,
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And I do want to thank all of our panelists, all 5 of you. Wonderful. I wish we had more time. I really wish we were in person so people could reach out and connect with you. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn and saying if any of you do want to connect with any of the panelists, you could probably find them on LinkedIn or somewhere, social media somewhere, I'm sure, and reach out to them, myself included. Feel free to reach out anytime you have questions about getting involved with a board or a nonprofit and what to do or who. Absolutely. So thank you all to our wonderful panelists. We greatly appreciate your time and experience and expertise greatly. Thank you, Jeff, for helping me moderate the chat. And Annette, turn it back over to you to wrap it up.
Yeah, so again, I add my thanks, and I also dropped into the chat link, because you're wondering now, where are all the nonprofits? Who are they? What are they? We have a great resource that is free. It's called Board Connect, and it's like I said, I've dropped it in the chat. We're at time, and a lot of people are dropping off, so I'm not gonna bring it up to show everybody, but I will be sending a follow-up email to all registrants with that link. And nonprofits go on there, tell about who they are, and they let you know what openings they have for board, committee, and task force. So that's where you can find out, kind of explore your passion. It's kind of like a Facebook. You can actually like the organization and kind of follow them, and then you'll be notified when they actually do put out an opening if they don't have a current one. So that's a really great resource that we're able to provide for our community. So thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to all you. Thanks for everybody for sticking around a little bit late. As always, I stay on the Zoom a little longer. I won't close the meeting for everybody in case somebody has any questions they want to ask me individually. I'll stay on for a little bit later. So otherwise, thank you and have a wonderful evening. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Annette. And we expect crab rangoons next time.
Yes, exactly.